In relation to God, what did he say about himself?
He said that he'd be the one coming in the clouds. I'm sure
In relation to God, like he must, if he was God, second person of the Trinity, he should identify himself as such to the public. Otherwise, he's deceiving the people to not know who he is. Is there a deception?
Perhaps to cure, perhaps.
Is there a deception going on? Did he identify himself who he is? Yes. And what did he identify himself as? If he was God?
But of course, Jesus didn't wax theological about the Trinitarian relations and whatnot. But that's because that language to understand these things, it wasn't there at the time.
What do you mean? He couldn't just simply say, I'm God? Was that difficult for him to say? I'm God?
But he did actually deny that he was God, actually. It's not that we don't have any information. In one of the earliest Mark's Gospel, Mark chapter 10, he actually denies he is God.
No one good but God.
A man comes and says, good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus said, why do you call me good? There's no one good but God alone. An explicit disavowal of any divine status. And this is a commonplace in biblical scholarship. It's not some wacky reading.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, was it difficult for him to say I'm God?
He denies it.
See, you have caught me on this one. I must admit, you have caught me on this one, and I would have to do my reading on that.
But think about it. Okay, fine. We accept your full honesty and sincerity there. We applaud and praise you for this. But think about it.
Like when it comes to mind, I don't have a sort
fine,
of
fine.
Text
But think about it. If Jesus is going about doing things, people should know exactly who he is. But he doesn't identify himself ever that he is the God on earth.
But he even denies it. That's my point.
He denies it.
It's not like he's ambiguous.
And not only that, he tells people, worship the one in heaven.
Yeah.
Worship the Father who's in heaven.
There's no one good but God alone.
He says you should worship the one in heaven.
He should have said,
our Father who art in heaven.
He should have said, yes, you're right, I am good, because I am Yahweh, or I am the divine Son, I am the second person of the Trinity. But he doesn't avail himself of the opportunity. Instead, he does the precise opposite of what he should have done on your reading. He denies his any divine identity at all.
No, he
Why?
didn't
Because
deny.
he's a Jew.
Instead, he says, I can't of myself do anything. What I hear, what I judge is only one because the Father tells me so. So he's constantly saying that, okay, he's been sent by someone, and the one who's sent is his Father and your Father, and his God and your God.
So
right?
Jesus said he had a God, did he?
Yeah, he says, I'm going to my God and your God. So he's identifying very clearly that he has a God that he's going to, and he has a Father that he's going to, which is your Father too. So the sonship and fathership is not exclusive to Jesus, because he's making it inclusive to everyone else. So now we understand the idea of sonship is something to do with being righteous and so on, this kind of language rather than one of literal, like I am exclusively the begotten Son of God and so on. So throughout the New Testament writings, we find Jesus identified himself as the one being sent by God, who's doing the works of God, and he tells people to worship God and worship no one else. If you now contextualize all of this, and then you see when he says, you, the only true God, in John 17:3, it makes sense because he's already identifying who the true God is. There is no other verse where Jesus is identifying who the true God is. John 17:3 is the clearest verse who identify who the God is. He didn't say, and I am that only true God, or we are the only true God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. He identified one person. So that only true God in the language of Jesus is unipersonal, one person, and that is the Father.
This is very interesting because in Augustine's commentary on the Gospel of John, where he discusses this passage, and I've read it, he actually changes the Greek to say something else because he recognises the problem.
The difficulty.
And it's been recognised by scholars.
He might have been using like the Vulgate or something like that.
Well, the Vulgate, no, I don't think the Vulgate was published during Augustine's lifetime.
No, but there were like there was I forgot, there was the old Vulgate, so the one before Jerome, because there was there were informal translations before Jerome.
But the point is, he was aware of the standard meaning, and he actually changed it. And this has been cited by many scholars, example of his dishonesty in altering the text to make it conform to his Trinitarianism. And I can't find any excuse I can think for Augustine. Maybe he had a bad hair day, I don't know. He altered the text.
Just to add on this, though, we find similar things in the manuscript tradition when it says, no one knows the hour, not even the Son, was excluded from certain manuscript tradition because the scribes found it difficult to think even, like how come the Son would not know?
But there's another point here. Okay, let's grant for a second. How did the disciples understand this? After Jesus alleged resurrection, ascension into heaven, the disciples have been given the Holy Spirit according to the book of Acts. Peter, the Prince of the Apostles, the first pope in your theology, in your ecclesiology, how did he? So now Jesus is gone from the scene. Peter has the Holy Spirit. He's now telling the Jews who Jesus really is. No longer is he in any doubt about who Jesus is. So according to the book of Acts, chapter 2, verse 22, you've actually already quoted it, Peter says, Israelites, listen to this. This is who he is. This is who Jesus is, by the way. Your Pope, your first Pope.
Yes.
Jesus was a man through whom God did signs and wonders amongst you, as you yourselves know. The first statement that Peter, filled with the Holy Spirit, tells the Israelites that Jesus is a man, that God worked through him.
Because,
But you believe he's the second person of the Trinity.
Going from like a Chalcedonian language, of course, Jesus is true man, true God.
But Peter doesn't say that. That's a later formulation.
But it's not mutually exclusive in the sense that
is.
Peter says, Peter's said Jesus, man through whom God did many wonders.
Yeah.
He's not denying that Jesus is true God. See, that's what I would sort of
But he is denying it implicitly, because he's not anachronistically denying it. He wasn't aware of this
When it
formulation.
comes to implicit stuff, that comes down to interpretation.
No, it doesn't. Let me explain why. If Jesus was a man through whom God worked signs and miracles, then God is an external entity, being from Jesus. This external independent being worked through this human to do the miracles and signs we see around him. That's very different from saying that this man was also divine in a Trinitarian sense. They're conceptually very distinct and different. So I don't think they're complementary. I think they're completely different.
See, but when it comes to the language which the early fathers or even the apostles used, we don't see that language as being almost like theologically exhaustive in the sense that the full, I suppose, all the categories are there, all the distinctions are being made there. They're not. They often speak in a very primitive language. Even the Ante-Nicene fathers speak in a very primitive way about the Trinitarian relations and whatnot. But we don't. They aren't the be-all and end-all. We don't stop with them. There's a development of the language to sort of better refine, at least from our perspective, better refine how we understand God, the relations within the one God, and.
I understand I used to be a Catholic. Like you, I'm sure you studied this at university. I did as well. I get what you're saying. The development of Christian doctrine, John Henry Newman, which converted me to Catholicism at university. I get what you're saying. I used to believe that, heart and soul. The problem I have with it, though, is that it is discontinuous. It's so discontinuous with what Jesus is supposedly had said and what happened later. As not to be a development, but to change the metaphor. It's more like Darwinian evolution, from one species to a completely different species.
That's
and so,
political.
no, but that's how I see it. It's not just development in a kind of... John Henry Newman, in his celebrated work, used the metaphor of an acorn. This is the development of doctrine, Christian doctrine. So a tree and an acorn are just organically related. One comes the other. And that's how he saw the doctrine of the Trinity developing in his book. I'd say no, it is so discontinuous. It's like a tiger evolving into an elephant. I mean, they're completely different species, and therefore one is not the legitimate, authentic successor of the other. And I found in Islam that it articulated these earliest ideas that we've been talking about perfectly, and later Christianity is the illegitimate, discontinuous development, and therefore must be rejected in the name of truth. In the name of truth itself, truth to God, we must reject that and go back to the original uncorrupted form. And Islam expresses that in a very pure form in Surah 112, which you recited already.
When it comes to Newman's development of doctrine or development of dogma, even, it's not unquestionably accepted by Catholic theologians. There are some problems which I've heard about with his theory. And so it's not canonized or dogmatized.
Oh, he was literally canonized as a saint in Rome.
No, but as saints,
he was literally canonized.
The magisterial process of canonizing the saint isn't infallible.
Are you saying he shouldn't have been canonized as a saint?
No. What I'm saying is, in terms of knowledge and whatnot, sure, a saint can be canonized, but that doesn't mean their views are given the rubber stamp. It just means they lived a holy life.
It means his views are not. He would never have been made a saint in the Catholic Church just a few years ago if his theology had been wrong. That would have been unthinkable.
His theology wasn't wrong wholesale. It's just when it comes to this particular theory about how dogma developed, it's not got universal acceptance. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay. Well, we can argue about that. My point is,
people accept modified versions of his theory. Is what I'm trying to say.
I'm saying that later Christian doctrine is not. It's discontinuous and radically at odds with the earliest true understanding of the faith, which we find even in the Gospels we have, where Jesus goes ahad, not three. Jesus never says three, he always says one. Like Bilal. Bilal was the early companion. He was tortured and under torture to say many, but he said no, ahad. And no matter how much you torture the Gospels, I would submit, they will always say ahad. They will always say one, not three.
See,
and Islam says the same.
Like I've said many times before, like I've said, when it comes to how I as a Catholic ground God's unity, it is grounded in His essence, and there's only one essence, and that's how His unity and His oneness is grounded.
It's Greek metaphysics.
I've given you some examples already.
This is the language we use to try and understand these things.
It's not the language Jesus used.
Well, obviously not, because
all the prophets.
Obviously not.
And this matters.
We've talked about some of the examples why, even though you ground on the unity of the essence, still incoherent.
This language we've used, Greg, we've mentioned how we've almost we've baptized the philosophy.
I think Greek metaphysics has hijacked the Christian church, and they're using language which is not found on the lips of Moses or the prophets or Jesus or any of them, and it's an alien pagan metaphysics by which you conjure these languages of metaphysics and essence and some ousia and some substance and hypostasis. This is not the language of the Jewish prophets.
And you do know that the Quran addresses the Christians and says, do not say Trinity. This is better for you, for your God, your Lord is one. And do not say...
Three what?
I'm asking you the same question. Three what? What do you believe in? Three what?
I believe in one substance.
And three what?
With three subsistent relations.
Is that what Jesus said?
No.
Exactly. So the Quran is addressing exactly, it doesn't have to address Greek metaphysics. The Quran is addressing exactly what the Christian... Whatever you say the three, the Quran is saying God is none of that. God is one. And the Quran says don't say God is Jesus or Jesus is God. Just want to make this point very quickly. So the Quran is not unfamiliar with the Christian doctrine and development and doxicology and Christology, whatever, right? The Quran is aware of all of that, but saying, look, stop all of that. For your God is one God. This is what Jesus said. Worship my God and your God. That's the straight path. So the Quran is asking you come back to the Jesus' teaching as a Christian, and if you do that, eventually you will recognize that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is the messenger, the prophet, and then of course you will become a Muslim, because all the prophets, all of them came to tell people to become Muslims, to accept Islam. You seem to be quite familiar with the Islamic tradition here and there about the Quran. I mean, research a bit more into it, reflect a bit more into it, look at those passages where it addresses the Christians directly and the Jews directly, and see the dynamics that's going on there. Why is the Quran saying such stuff? Because the Quran came as a muhayminan, as a criterion, quality control, in which the truth that was already there in your traditions, it is attested, and it's saying it's fine. It testifies to the truthfulness, but it falsifies the falsehood and the error that has crept in within the traditions, within the teaching and so on. The Quran doesn't simply say, oh, Jesus never claimed to be, the Bible doesn't claim, it doesn't use the word Bible or something, but it doesn't somehow make it unfamiliar that, okay, there are people who took Jesus as God. That's what the Quran is saying. Don't say God is Jesus or Jesus is God, because that's not what Jesus was. He was a sent one. He was a sent one. So when we talk about the conflict of will, you should research this further, because in any way you look, there were three ways there can be will of these three persons. They can have three separate individual wills. They can have the same identical will, or they can have one will being shared by the three. I don't know what it means by sharing by the three. Like I gave an example, how can you share a sandwich by three individuals equally? If I'm going to have a portion of the sandwich, and if I 100% take it, you have none. So you can't have the Father sharing 100% divinity.
See, I would see those analogies as being quite limited. That would be my sort of, I suppose, view on it.
No, I'm saying this is how the church or your tradition tries to reconcile and harmonize the problem that we find of triunitheism, right? I'm not saying it's outcast polytheism. It's some kind of limited sense triunitheism, three divine beings working together as one deity. But still it's not monotheism. But Jesus was a monotheist. He worshipped one God. He told people to worship one God. Right. And this is what we're inviting you to.
Case closed.
This is what we're inviting you to. Come back to the worship of the God of Jesus.
She's not Allah, by the way.
When it comes to the Quranic verse which mentions about, do not say three, if I remember correctly, isn't it like, do not say like third of a three?
No, there are also verse about three and three. For example, no, thalithu thalatha. Or don't say thalatha. Intahu. So Thalith al-Thalas would be like third of the three. Okay? Or it could even refer to a technical term mean Trinity, because that's what it is. Within the Trinity, the Father is what? He's the third or first member of the Trinity.
He's one subsistent relation.
Wait. Within the three persons, the Father is not three persons.
Oh, no, of course not. Of course
Exactly. This is what the Quran identified. He is the one of the three or third of the three, because there's three persons.
See, because like this is like like if I was an Eastern Orthodox, I would sort of believe in a sort of hard and fast ontological three. Because I'm sure like you mentioned it before about how they use like all the sort of language and whatnot. But as a Catholic, as a Latin Christian, I would say that third of three doesn't apply to me in the sense that we believe one substance, three subsistent relations within the one substance. So fundamentally, we'd see that as just one God. I would see that
even if that ayah didn't apply to you,
Orthodox.
the other one applies to you. Thalatha. There's no way escape from any Christians, because the Quran incorporates such a concise language in which all your different denominations and branches are included. Don't say thalatha, three, that's it. If you say three hypostases, three whatever, is all inclusive in there. The Quran accounts for all of that, and it asks you to worship one God. If I say one and not two, do you understand the difference between one and two?
Yeah.
Right. Have I included one means 20 in one? Of course not. It never came to your mind that one is 20 in one. One is one. Unity. But in the Christian Trinity, what you are espousing, this belief system, is such that one has to really be told that's what this is. It's not something that is universally understood. It's not something universally achievable. When you say one God, imagine a concept in which God is 5 in 20. You can't arrive at this logically in any way by common sense. You can't achieve this by just your own intuition. This is something that it has to be imparted by someone telling you that. Okay? So God is telling you that God has been the God of everyone throughout time, and every nation. When messengers came to them, it was the same message: worship none but this one God. So we are not asking you something to say like, okay, believing in something which is like Islam brought something new. Islam brought the primordial religion.
You see a continuity there.
Continuity, exactly. The same old message from all the prophets.
Because what was on Moses' lips in the Shema is repeated and reaffirmed by Jesus in the Shema, is repeated and reaffirmed in the Quran,
I would
in
say
Surah
that
112. So on the three major dispensations, Judaism, Jesus and Muhammad, they all agree. But that is completely different from the idea of a three-person deity, which you subscribe to. Jesus never knew this, Moses never knew this, the Quran refutes it. So to be a follower of Jesus today, I would submit, you really need to be a Muslim. And there's no alternative. You can't be a Jew. Why? Because Jews deny Jesus. They do. Obviously, they deny Jesus. You can't be a Christian because your theology is so different from that of Jesus, who explicitly referenced the Shema. But can you be a Muslim? What does Islam say? It says exactly what Jesus said. It's exactly what Moses said. Therefore, your only option to be an authentic follower of the one true God is to submit to that God, and that in English is the Arabic word Islam. Submission to God.
Do you actually believe this? Because you keep quoting. Do you believe in what
Yeah.
you say?
So let's leave it there. I mean, you can summarize what you have to say, because I have to go and pray Maghrib. It's our time, Maghrib time already.
No problem.
So tell me.
About the sifat, so the attributes of God according to the Quran. How do you understand those? How do you understand like the interplay between?
To give you an example, we believe God is knowledgeable. It doesn't mean His knowledge is God. We believe God speaks, He has speech. It doesn't mean the speech of God is God, like the Quran is not God.
There's a distinction between the attribute and...
Because what we're saying, the attribute describes, manifests who God is. It's not like a separate entity, like in Christianity, the Logos, the mind of God, becomes personified into another God. Imagine the mercy of God became a woman, the daughter of God. You'd say, it doesn't make sense. But this is exactly what we're saying.
How would you understand the Quran? And how, because the Quran is God's
The Quran is a speech of God. It's not another God. It's not another God. Yeah. The Torah.
From their point of view.
Yeah.
If it's the people of Israel, they say
The Torah is not.
They don't accept it.
The Ten Commandments
A lie.
are the words of God.
Right.
But it's not God, is it? Do you worship the Ten Commandments? Do you worship the Ten Commandments?
Yeah.
He worships the Ten Commandments. But anyway, I have to go. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. Perhaps we speak to you again. You take care. But carry on. Jack, carry on reading the Quran and reflecting on it, because you seem to be on the right track. And you are a very honest, sincere, truth-seeking individual. God guides exactly those individuals
See, I
who are sincere and
believe I
honest.
found the truth in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
I would have to have
You
found
are
that.
you are on the transition to Islam. That's what we see.
I was. I used to be a Catholic at a Ephraim college where I studied with priests to learn Christian theology, and then I discovered Islam. And believe me, it was the next step for me. And I invite you to the same path.
Okay. Jack, take care.
I'm quite firm in my beliefs.
So was I. So was I. Okay.
I've already got.
I'm sure you have.
Yeah.
He's already got it for us. I'm not surprised.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna give these mics away. Can I?